Oh.
All right, when you're doing vertex form,
bro, that's literally what I wrote down.
Right? But what do I need to factor out? A has to be 1, so what do I factor out? A 5. Good.
Yeah,
you do that by dividing. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 1 divided by 5 is going to be 1/5.
Oh, I knew that.
Mm-hmm. Then you put in your spaces. That step's still the same. And my formula is b divided by 2 squared. But we don't want to take 1/5 divided by 2. That's messy. So then I showed you a shortcut. Yep, a better way, not a shortcut, would be to multiply by 1/2 and square it. So negative 1/10 squared, which is going to be 1 over 100. So if I add 1/100th here, okay, but if you remember that's getting multiplied by 5, what am I subtracting over here? So 5 over 100 simplifies to 1/20th. Right? Because multiply tops, multiply bottoms, be 5 over 100 is 1/20th. Okay. Then I told you whatever number you have here before you square it
1/10
goes into your binomial. So this is what I have for vertex form. X minus 1/10 squared. And then I need to do this right here, 4 minus 1/20th. So common denominator, negative 80/20ths minus 1/20th is going to be negative 81/20ths. And that's my vertex form. So I can stop there and say, okay, my vertex, positive 1/10, because that means 1/10 to the right.
Oh, I did it. X plus.
Yeah, remember, it's always opposite in the parentheses.
X minus 1/10.
X minus 1/10 because this is a negative 1/10 before I squared it. Yeah, keep that sign. And then I can keep going to solve. Right, so 5, add the 81/20ths over. Okay. You're not going to want to divide by 5 because 81/20ths divided by 5 is messy. So what you can do is multiply by 1/5. Right, that's easier when you're working with fractions, and that crosses off the 5s. And that would be 81 over 100.
Wow.
Get rid of the squared. Square root both sides. So I get x minus 1/10 equals plus or minus 9/10. Right? Because square root of 81 is 9. Square root of 100 is 10. So what happens is my radical went away. So to find my roots, I can actually simplify all the way down to a number, because if I add 1/10, you have to consider both cases. Positive 9/10 plus 1/10 is 10/10,
So the answer is X,
which is 1.
X equals 1/10 plus or minus the square root of 9 over 10. Is that the answer?
No. Because if you're taking plus or minus 9/10 plus 1/10, you can actually simplify it. You combine like terms.
1.
So I take the positive 9/10 plus 1/10, and I take the negative 9/10 plus 1/10. When your radical disappears, when your radical goes away, you can actually use the plus and minus to find both answers. So I get 1 and negative 4/5. Okay, so when your radical goes away, if you're doing vertex form and you're solving and you square root both sides and your radical goes away, you need to keep going and add, subtract. Do both add, subtract. Is how the quadratic formula. Let's take this example, which we just did, and I'm going to leave these answers up here. And let's go over the quadratic formula, because the quadratic formula takes this process but puts it into a formula, so you don't have to do all of this. You can just plug numbers in and solve. That's what the quadratic formula does. It takes the completing the square process but makes a formula out of it. So all you have to do is simplify and get these answers. So it's easier. Quadratic formula is way easier. Okay? So if it's not factorable, if I say find your roots and it's not factorable, right? Factoring is the easiest way. Factor it, find your roots. You use quadratic formula. And what the quadratic formula is this. X equals right? That's a quadratic formula. So notice I have three variables. I have a b, an a, and a c. Where do those b, a, and c come from? A is 5, b is -1, and c is -4. Because I have to subtract the 4 to the other side. So a is 5, b is -1, c is -4. A, B, C.
So can we just plug and chug?
So plug them in. So x would equal negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a.
Can we just put that on there?
No, because you have to be able to do order of operations. Okay? So sometimes calculator will only help if you're using it correctly. Because your calculator, you have to be able to say a negative squared is positive. And sometimes if you don't put the parentheses in the right spot, it won't do that. So you have to be careful. And this is going to be plus, -1 squared is a +1. B squared is always positive. -4 times 5 times a -4 is going to be a positive, because double negative. Positive what? What's 20 times 4? 80? Which would be 81 over 10, what is the square root of 81?
9.
Over 10. What's 1 plus 9? 10 over 10, which is 1, right? Or 1 minus 9, which is -8 over 10, which is -4/5. See how I get the same answers? But it's half the time. It's the shortcut of completing the square. All right, start with standard form. Oops, let's put the 8x in the middle, right? So subtract the 8x over. Okay. So when you're using the quadratic formula, I would like to label my A, B, and C, because that's where some students get mixed up, is they try to put B in for A in for C. A is 1, B is -8, C is 16. Okay? So when you're taking these numbers and plugging them in, don't get any mixed around. Okay? So x equals -b. Yep, it's going to be a double negative, because it's a -b, but b is negative.
So it'll just be 8.
Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. That's the easy part. The easy part is putting A for A, B for B, C for C. Where students make mistakes is order of operations. You got to follow the order of operations. Okay? So simplifying the quadratic formula is where most mistakes occur. Okay? So double negative means positive. B squared is always positive. You have a -4 times 1 times 16. So it's -64, good. All over 2. Well, what's 64 minus 64? 0. So I have this, which is just going to be 4. Okay? Because 8 plus 0 divided by 2 is 4. 8 minus 0 divided by 2 is 4. So what happens here, where's my 2 roots, right? Whenever you have one answer, what's happening is that your vertex is on 4. So 4 is my only root, my only, right, x-intercept, but it's happening twice. There's multiplicity. There's actually multiplicity of 2 there. But when you only get one answer, that's what it means. You only have one root. Right? root, or what else they call zeros, or your x-intercepts, right? This point right here is all three of those things. Just depends what you want to call it. So again, standard form. So subtract the 4x, add the 1 to get it to the other side, right? And remember, quadratic formula is find your roots. Where is this parabola crossing the x-axis? That's what we're finding. So my a is 1, my b is -4, my c is 1. So quadratic formula, x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. Sub them in, and then simplify. So simplifying, this is going to be a positive 4, because double negative, plus or minus square root, remember b squared is always positive, always, minus 4, because -4 times 1 times 1 is -4, all over 2, which would be 4 plus or minus square root 12 over 2, which is a good answer, but I would take some points off. Why? Oops. It's not simplified, because what do I know about the square root of 12? Which is 2 times 2. There's 2 2's, I take one out. So it's 4 plus or minus 2 root 3 over 2, which would still get a point off. Why? Because it's not simplified still, because look at 4, 2, and 2. What can I take it out of all those numbers? A 2. So it finally would simplify into something like this. And again, what does that mean? That means if I had a parabola, it's going to cross here at 2 minus root 3 and here at 2 plus root 3. That's what I'm finding. I'm finding the roots, right? The x-intercepts, the zeros, where it's crossing the x-axis. So standard form, subtract the 3. A is 1, B is 4, C is -3. So quadratic formula, I would have x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So, order of operations, 4 squared, 16. This would be -4 times 1 times -3, so that's a positive 12, because double negative is positive, which would be -4 plus or minus the square root of 28 over 2, which is now simplified, but you always need to reduce the radical. And 28 is 2 and 14, and 14 is 2 and 7. So there's 2 2's, you take one out. And then one more step, because 4, 2, and 2, you can take a 2 out. So it'd be 2 plus or minus square root 7. There's my 2 roots, my 2 x-intercepts.